you know, briefly, I started my own company because when I came to America, I couldn't find any good Pinot Noir in the 60s. We had Paul Masson in a supermarket. It was not to my liking. Originally I came from Burgundy, but Mâcon area, Pouilly-Fuissé. When I was a child, I always did harvest. There was a big excitement for the kids, you know, in September came, and before we go back to school, we did the harvest. And, I really loved it, and you know, it was the last thing before going to school. And we picked up grapes. We were not paid for it. It was the thing that you had to do, but it was great fun. We had wooden press in those days, and I would step in the wooden press, you know, with my bare feet. And we pulled the bar to press the wine, you know, it's like a big corkscrew, and you know, it was all night. So, you know, I tasted a lot of wine when I was a child. My parents always had wine at the table the weekend, but of course during the summer we had a little bit, and people will come and bring bottles, and the kids had a sip. We never drank otherwise. But I never knew that I developed a palate, you know, for red wines or Burgundy or whatever, Champagne. And when I came to America, I was, you know, wanted to drink some wine, and of course it was a big disappointment. The only wine I liked was Beaulieu Cabernet Sauvignon, Private Reserve. And of course what I did in 1965, I drove to Napa Valley to see Napa Valley, where there was hardly anybody except Inglenock, Beaulieu, Louis Martine. And so I knocked on Beaulieu's door, and André Chélichet, who was the vice president and winemaker in charge, and also a big Francophile because he studied in Bordeaux, said, look, ma chérie, if you want Pinot Noir, you got to get it from Burgundy. And I said, oh, okay, that's, you know, so we had a good chat. And I went back to San Francisco and I looked for French wines in a store, and of course it was a very big disappointment. They were all négociants wine, meaning they come from a big blender, you know, type of wine merchant that blend different producers' wine and put a label on it. And the famous label of the time was a merchant from Bristol, Avery, who bought wine from France, but in those days we were not obligated to buy the bottles. You could buy barrels, so God knows what happened in Bristol after the wine arrived. You know, you could put any labels they wanted, and I found some very disappointing wines. So that gave me an idea of looking, you know, starting to import wine, and I found an importer who said, well, why don't you sell my wines? I have very good wines. And of course, I told him his wine were very bad after I tasted them, and he wanted my opinion, so he got it. And I said, well, you know, it's a shame that nobody imports small wineries. There are a lot of producers in Burgundy that would love to do business. So he said, well, why don't you buy for me? And this, what happened in 1969, I did my first Tour de France with a little Volkswagen. And I was lucky enough to meet some already 5 wineries. And one of them, I must say, was my crown jewel till today, because it's Chateau Rayas or Chateau du Pape. So, this being said, I created a mailing list of doctors and lawyers, and I sold the wine by mail, and he had a retail license, so it was, you know, nothing very big, but, you know, I started to have a little reputation, and after 5 years, I decided, well, I might start my own company, and that's what happened. In 1978, I started to apply for a license and got going in 79, and to my surprise, you know, I had already been approaching restaurants, but I developed quite a large business right away because I was lucky enough to import the wine of Henri Jaillet. and other producer that became very famous. Robert Parker started his newsletter in '79 at the same time I started my company, and some wine merchant sent my sample. I didn't know who he was, and he was just starting himself. But from Parker and other wine reviewer like the LA Time, all of a sudden I established a reputation, and people wanted to have wine not only from California but from Missouri, Arizona, whatever. So that's how my business got going.